The diplomatic ship descended through the clouds of New Haven like a silver needle threading through cotton. Ambassador Quellen watched the planet's surface come into view and felt his concern grow with each passing moment. Dense forests covered most of the land below, broken only by clearings where the human colony had carved out space for their settlements. His diplomatic assistant, scientist Torvak, stood beside him at the viewport, his expression unreadable. The planet was rejected by 12 different species before humans claimed it, Torvak said quietly. He tapped his datapad, bringing up files on the screen. The wildlife classification listed it as extreme danger level. The council recommended it remain uninhabited. Quellen nodded slowly. He had read the same reports. The planet's apex predator, a species the humans called ravagers, had made colonization attempts by other races impossible. The creatures were massive, standing as tall as a human at the shoulder, with 6 powerful legs and armored hides that could deflect most standard weapons. Their jaws could crush metal, and they hunted in the dense forests with terrifying efficiency. Yet somehow, the humans had been here for 8 years. Not just surviving, but thriving, according to the preliminary reports. It made no sense. The ship landed on a cleared pad near the main settlement. Captain Lucas Perry was waiting for them at the base of the ramp. He was a tall man, with sun-weathered skin and calm gray eyes. He smiled as they approached and extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. Ambassador Quellen, Scientist Torvak, welcome to New Haven, Lucas said. His voice was warm and genuine. We're honored to have you here for the assessment. Quellen accepted the handshake cautiously. Humans had applied for membership in the Galactic Council, and this inspection was part of the evaluation process. Every species had to prove they could establish successful colonies on frontier worlds before being accepted. The fact that humans had chosen such a dangerous planet for their demonstration concerned him. Your colony has survived longer than expected, Quellen said carefully. The reports indicate very few casualties from wildlife attacks. Actually, we haven't had any attacks on colonists in over 5 years, Lucas replied, as he led them toward the settlement. We've learned to coexist with the local ecosystem. Torvak's eyes widened slightly. That should have been impossible. Predators of this caliber didn't simply ignore potential prey. They followed their instincts, and those instincts drove them to hunt. The settlement was larger than Quellen had anticipated. Clean buildings made from local materials spread across several acres, connected by well-maintained paths. Gardens grew between structures, and he could see human children playing in a nearby park. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic. But as they walked, Quellen noticed something odd about the forest edge. Large shapes moved in the shadows between the trees, pacing alongside them. Those are ravagers, he said, stopping in his tracks. Yes, Lucas confirmed, his tone casual. They're curious about visitors. Don't worry, they won't come any closer to the settlement without invitation. Without invitation, the word struck Quellen as bizarre, as if the predators were guests rather than threats. Their tour continued to the colony's medical facility. Dr. Helen Carter met them there, a woman with kind eyes and dirt under her fingernails. She wore a lab coat over practical field clothes and greeted them with obvious enthusiasm. I'm so glad you could see our work, she said, practically bouncing on her feet. We've made incredible progress in understanding the local species. She led them through the facility, past examination rooms and laboratory spaces, until they reached a large enclosure at the back of the building. Quellen felt his breath catch in his throat. Inside the enclosure lay a ravager. The massive predator was stretched out on a padded floor, its breathing slow and steady. One of its hind legs was wrapped in bandages and held in place by a medical brace. A human technician sat nearby, monitoring equipment that tracked the creature's vital signs. This is Big Red, Helen said affectionately, as if speaking about a pet rather than a killing machine. We found him 3 days ago with a badly broken leg. Probably from a fall in the mountains. Another week in the wild and infection would have killed him. Torvak moved closer to the glass, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. You brought an apex predator into your medical facility? Of course, Helen said, sounding surprised by the question. He needed help. The break was severe. Required surgery to set properly. He'll be here for another 2 weeks. While the bone heals, Quellen watched as the technician stood and approached the Ravager. The creature opened one massive eye, regarding the human with what looked almost like trust. The technician reached through a small opening in the enclosure and gently stroked the Ravager's armored head. The predator made a low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl. Every civilized species maintains strict protocols about apex predators, Quellen said slowly. Observation from a distance, deterrent systems, clear boundaries. This level of interaction is considered extremely dangerous. Lucas and Helen exchanged a glance that Quellen couldn't quite read. We've found that understanding leads to better outcomes than fear, Lucas said. When we first arrived, we studied the Ravagers carefully. We learned their behavior patterns, their communication methods, their social structures. We discovered they're far more intelligent than previous assessments indicated. Intelligence doesn't reduce predatory instinct, Torvak pointed out. No, Helen agreed. But it creates opportunities for different kinds of relationships. They continued the tour, and Quellen saw more evidence of the impossible. Another enclosure held a younger Ravager recovering from wounds sustained in a territorial fight. In a rehabilitation yard, a nearly recovered Ravager paced back and forth while a human named Kate Morrison made notes on its movement patterns. The creature showed no aggression toward her despite being separated by only a low fence. The most shocking sight came near the end of their visit. A small human child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, stood at the edge of one of the enclosures. The boy held something in his hands and was making clicking sounds with his tongue. A Ravager approached from inside the enclosure, moving slowly, and the child tossed what looked like chunks of meat through the fence. The predator caught them and made that same rumbling sound Quellen had heard earlier. That's Danny Clark, Lucas said, noticing their alarm. He helps with the feeding program after school. He's very good with them. You allow children to interact with these creatures? Quellen asked, unable to keep the shock from his voice. Under supervision, yes. The Ravagers that come to the facility learn to recognize humans as helpers, not prey or threats. Danny has been helping since he was 6. Torvak was recording everything on his datapad, his expression troubled. This entire operation violated every standard protocol for dealing with dangerous wildlife. It should have ended in tragedy long ago, yet clearly, it hadn't. As the sun began to set, they watched the release of a fully recovered Ravager. The creature had spent 6 weeks in the facility, recovering from multiple injuries. Now it stood at the forest edge, a strange collar device around its thick neck. Helen activated something on her control pad, and the collar beeped twice. The Ravager turned its massive head to look at her one last time, then disappeared into the forest with surprising speed and grace. The collar is a tracking device, Lucas explained. It helps us monitor the Ravager's movements and health after release. We've released over 40 recovered individuals in the past 8 years. Quellen watched the forest where the predator had vanished. Something about this entire situation felt wrong, but he couldn't identify exactly what. The humans seemed genuine in their care for these dangerous creatures. The operation was methodical and well organized, yet no other species had managed anything like this level of coexistence with apex predators. As they walked back to their guest quarters for the evening, Torvak leaned close to Quellen and whispered, "This will need to be included in our report. The Council may view this as evidence of human irrationality." The next 4 days revealed patterns that made Quellen increasingly uneasy. Each morning, he and Torvak observed different aspects of the colony's operations, and each observation added another piece to a puzzle that refused to form a clear picture. On the second day, Lieutenant Kate Morrison took them to what the humans called the training yard. It was a large open space at the edge of the settlement, bordered by forest on 2 sides. Kate was a compact woman with sharp eyes and an air of calm competence. She wore practical field gear and carried a small device clipped to her belt. "We work with the Ravagers here after they've completed initial rehabilitation," she explained, leading them to an observation platform. "This helps us understand their capabilities and intelligence better." A Ravager emerged from the tree line, moving with the fluid grace of a natural hunter. Kate raised one hand and made a specific gesture. The creature stopped immediately, its attention focused entirely on her. She whistled 3 short notes, and the Ravager moved to her left. Another whistle pattern, and it sat back on its haunches like an obedient hound. "You've trained them," Torvak said, his voice flat with disbelief. "We've learned to communicate with them," Kate corrected. "There's a difference. Training implies we're forcing behavior. This is more like teaching a language." She demonstrated several more signals. Each time, the Ravager responded precisely. It wasn't mindless obedience, though. Quellen could see the intelligence in the creature's eyes, the way it anticipated Kate's movements, the decision-making process behind each action. "How long does this process take?" Quellen asked. "Depends on the individual," Kate replied. "Some Ravagers pick up the basic signals in a few weeks. Others take months. We never push them. If they don't want to learn, we respect that." Ryan Foster joined them later that afternoon. He was a young technician responsible for the colony's communication systems. He showed them the tracking collars in detail, explaining how each device could transmit location data, basic biometric information, and receive specific signal patterns. "Why do you need to communicate with them after release?" Torvak asked, studying one of the collars closely. "Once they're healthy, why maintain contact?" Ryan's answer came a bit too quickly. "Scientific research. We're building a comprehensive database on Ravager behavior, movement patterns, territorial ranges. It's valuable information about the ecosystem." But Quellen noticed something in Ryan's expression. A brief hesitation before he spoke. The answer was true, but it wasn't complete. That evening, Quellen reviewed the resource allocations for the colony. The numbers troubled him. Nearly 30% of the colony's medical resources went to the Predator Rehabilitation Program. Sophisticated scanning equipment, surgical facilities, specialized staff. The humans had built an entire infrastructure dedicated to helping creatures that had tried to kill colonists from other species. "This makes no logical sense," Torvak said, looking over the same data. "The cost-benefit analysis is completely imbalanced. They gain nothing tangible from this investment." "Humans claim to value compassion highly," Quellen replied, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Perhaps this is a cultural expression we don't understand." "Perhaps," Torvak said slowly. "Or perhaps there's something we're not seeing." On the 3rd day, Jake Hamilton gave them a tour of the colony's security systems. He was the security chief. A broad-shouldered man with a military bearing. He showed them the sensor network, the communication protocols, the emergency response procedures. "You have remarkably few active defense systems for a frontier colony," Quellen observed. "No perimeter weapons, minimal barriers, only a small security force." "We don't need extensive defenses," Jake replied calmly. "The natural ecosystem provides adequate protection." The phrasing struck Quellen as odd. Protection from what? And how could an ecosystem that contained apex predators provide protection rather than represent a threat? That afternoon, they encountered a colonist named Sophie Green hiking back to the settlement. She carried field research equipment and moved through the forest edge without any visible concern. When Torvak asked if she worried about predators, she laughed. "Not at all. I just request backup if I'm going far from the paths." "What kind of backup?" Quellen asked immediately. Sophie's smile faltered slightly. She glanced toward Jake, who had accompanied them. "Oh, you know, just standard safety protocols. Someone monitoring my location, that kind of thing." But again, Quellen sensed something unsaid, a piece of information just beneath the surface. That night changed everything. Quellen couldn't sleep and stood at the window of his guest quarters, looking out over the settlement. The twin moons provided enough light to see clearly. What he witnessed made his blood run cold. Ravagers emerged from the forest. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens of them. They moved along the settlement perimeter in a coordinated pattern. Every few hundred meters, a Ravager would stop, raise its head, and make a distinctive howling call. Another would answer from a different position. Then another, and another. It was a patrol pattern. The predators were guarding the settlement. Quellen immediately contacted Torvak, and together they watched for over an hour. The pattern never varied. The Ravagers maintained their positions, alert and focused outward, protecting the humans inside. The next morning, Quellen confronted Lucas Perry directly. "The Ravagers are guarding your settlement," he said without preamble. "I watched them last night. This isn't random animal behavior. It's organized, purposeful, coordinated." Lucas met his gaze steadily. "The Ravagers that we've helped have developed a protective relationship with the colony. They recognize us as part of their territory." "Territory protection is defensive behavior against other predators," Torvak interjected. "Not active guarding of another species." "The Ravagers are more complex than standard classifications suggest," Helen Carter said. She had joined the meeting, along with Jake Hamilton and Kate Morrison. "They're capable of forming cooperative relationships across species lines." "How convenient," Quellen said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "You rescue injured predators out of compassion, and they coincidentally begin protecting you." "It's not coincidence," Jake said quietly. "It's trust. We help them. They remember. We don't threaten their territory. They don't threaten ours." Over time, those boundaries blurred. Now the Ravagers see the settlement as something worth protecting because we're part of their extended pack structure. Quellen wanted to believe it was that simple. But 8 years of diplomatic experience told him there was more to this story. The resource investment, the systematic approach, the communication protocols, the tracking systems. Each piece individually made some sense. Together, they suggested something far more deliberate. "Why did humans choose this planet?" he asked suddenly. "Of all the available colony worlds, why select one that 12 other species rejected as too dangerous?" The humans exchanged glances. Finally, Lucas spoke. "Because everyone else saw an obstacle where we saw an opportunity. Other species looked at the Ravagers and saw monsters. We looked and saw potential." "Potential for what?" Torvak pressed. "For understanding," Helen said firmly. "For building bridges instead of walls. For proving that coexistence is possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances." It was a good answer. A noble answer. But Quellen had spent decades reading between the lines of diplomatic statements. The truth was there, just beneath the surface of their words. That afternoon, they observed another release ceremony. A Ravager that had been with the colony for nearly 2 months was ready to return to the wild. As before, the collar device was activated before release. This time, Quellen paid closer attention to the control panel Helen used. The interface showed not just one Ravager, but dozens. Each represented by a marker on a map of the surrounding territory. Each collar transmitting data back to the colony. It was a network. A comprehensive, real-time tracking system for every Ravager they had ever helped. "You know where every released Ravager is at all times," he said slowly. "Within a certain range, yes," Ryan Foster confirmed. "The collars have limited transmission distance. But we've placed relay stations in key locations. It helps us monitor their health and movement." "And communicate with them," Quellen added. There was a long pause. "If necessary, yes," Kate Morrison admitted. "The collars can receive signals, as well as transmit. Basic commands in the whistle patterns they've learned to recognize. It's useful for managing territorial disputes or keeping them away from dangerous areas during storms." Quellen felt the final piece click into place. The humans hadn't just been rescuing predators out of kindness. They had been building a network. Creating relationships. Establishing communication channels. Mapping territories. Teaching signals. Installing tracking devices. The unidentified ship hung in orbit like a dark promise of violence. Quellen stood in the colony's command center, watching the main display screen alongside Lucas Perry and Colonel Andrew Pierce, who had arrived from the orbital station within an hour of the alert. Pierce was a compact man with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. "Pirate vessel," Pierce said, studying the ship's configuration. "Modified cargo hauler with military-grade weapons. Profile matches the Black Spine mercenary group. They've hit 6 frontier colonies in the past 2 years. Their pattern is predictable," Jake Hamilton added, pulling up tactical data. "They scout remote colonies, assess defenses, then hit hard and fast. They take supplies, equipment, anything valuable they can carry. They leave casualties. They leave casualties. Torvak moved closer to the display. You should evacuate. Your security force is too small to repel a determined attack. We have 25 trained security personnel, Lucas confirmed calmly. Intelligence suggests they'll land between 60 and 80 raiders. The numbers aren't in our favor. Then why aren't you evacuating? Quellen demanded. Pierce smiled, and it wasn't a comforting expression. Because we have other assets. Before Quellen could ask what that meant, the pirate ship began its descent. It broke into 3 separate landing craft, each heading for different points around the colony perimeter. Classic encirclement tactics. The humans would be surrounded, outnumbered, and overwhelmed within minutes of the landing. Ambassador, Scientist Torvak, please come with me, Lucas said. We're moving you to a secure shelter. You'll be able to observe everything from there. The shelter was a reinforced bunker beneath the medical facility. Inside, banks of monitors showed views from cameras positioned throughout the colony and the surrounding forest. Quellen and Torvak found themselves seated before these screens, watching as the pirate craft touched down in 3 clearing zones the raiders had obviously chosen during their scouting runs. They're efficient, Torvak observed as armed figures poured from the landing craft. Military discipline. Professional equipment. Quellen counted the raiders quickly. 73 total. Against 25 defenders. Even with superior position and defensive advantages, the humans would be overrun in minutes. But the humans in the command center seemed oddly calm. Jake Hamilton stood at a central console, his hands moving across controls with practiced precision. Kate Morrison occupied a secondary station, wearing a headset and speaking quietly into a microphone. Ryan Foster worked at his communications board, his fingers dancing across the interface. Protocol Shepherd is active, Jake announced. Handlers to positions. On the monitors, Quellen watched as human security personnel moved to designated spots around the colony perimeter. But they weren't forming defensive lines or setting up weapons. Instead, they stood exposed, each one carrying what looked like a handheld communication device and a backpack of equipment. This is suicide, Quellen whispered. They're not even taking cover. Wait, Pierce said simply. Ryan Foster pressed something on his console. Through the bunker's walls, Quellen heard a sound. Not loud, but pervasive. A series of tones and pulses across multiple frequencies. It was the same signal pattern he had heard the callers transmit, but amplified and broadcast across the entire area. The forest came alive. Ravagers emerged from the trees by the dozens. They moved with purpose and speed, converging on the 3 pirate landing zones from multiple directions. Quellen felt his breath catch as he realized the scale of what he was seeing. This wasn't a handful of grateful predators. This was an army. How many? Torvak asked, his voice barely audible. 207 Ravagers within response range, Kate Morrison reported calmly. All individuals we've treated and released over the past 8 years. 43 are responding from extended territories. 164 are in optimal response positions. On the northern landing zone, pirates were setting up a perimeter when the first Ravager struck. The creature came out of the forest like a missile, covering 50 meters in seconds. The pirate's weapons fire caught it in the armored hide, doing minimal damage. The Ravager's jaws closed on a raider's weapon, crushing the metal like paper. More Ravagers followed. Not in a wild charge, but in coordinated groups of 3 and 4. They moved like military units, each group working together. With practiced efficiency. Team 7, flank left on the eastern zone, Kate Morrison said into her headset. Team 12, hold position and drive them toward the clearing. Quellen realized with growing horror that she was directing the Ravagers. Each handler at the perimeter was coordinating groups of predators, like a commander managing troops. The whistle patterns, the hand signals, the communication devices. The Ravagers understood and responded with terrifying precision. On the eastern landing zone, a group of pirates tried to fall back to their craft. 5 Ravagers cut off their retreat while 3 more drove them away from the ship. The pirates found themselves herded into an open area where human security personnel had clear firing positions. It wasn't about the predators killing the raiders. It was about controlling the battlefield. Southwest team. Watch your crossing pattern, Jake Hamilton called out. Don't let them cluster. A group of Ravagers adjusted their approach, spreading out to prevent the pirates from forming a defensive position. Another group waited in the forest shadows, ready to respond if the pirates broke through the first line. The southern landing zone saw the most intense fighting. Commander Vrek, the pirate leader, had landed there with his elite troops. They were better equipped and better trained than the other raiders. They formed a tight defensive circle and maintained disciplined fire. But discipline meant nothing against an enemy that could flank from any direction through dense forest. Ravagers attacked from 3 sides simultaneously, drawing fire and attention, while another group circled behind the pirates' position. When the pirates realized they were surrounded, their formation broke. Team 4, press the advantage, Kate said. Team 9, cut off their northern exit. The Ravagers moved like water, flowing around obstacles, adapting to the changing battlefield. A pirate would fire at one predator, only to find another attacking from a different angle. The coordination was flawless, the tactical awareness sophisticated beyond anything Quellen had thought possible for wild animals. They're not wild, he said aloud, finally understanding. You've been training them for this. All of it. The medical care, the rehabilitation, the communication protocols. You've been building an army. We've been building a partnership. Pierce corrected, his eyes never leaving the monitors. There's a critical difference. Thanks for watching. Thanks I with see you. Thanks for watching. Thanks I'd like town of Alabud. Thanks will watching. Thanks I'd like subscribe to it for minds. Things will watching ever. Subscribe to Steam the Belding I'd. Things will want. What difference? Torvak demanded. You're using them as weapons. They're choosing to help us, Helen Carter said. She had joined them in the bunker, watching the battle unfold with obvious concern. Every Ravager out there is responding by choice. They remember when we saved their lives. They're returning the favor. This was your plan from the beginning, Quellen said. 8 years ago, when you established this colony, you knew the Ravagers were here. You chose this planet specifically because of them. Lucas Perry nodded slowly. We chose it because other species saw it as impossible. We saw potential. Not for conquest or dominance, but for cooperation. We studied the Ravagers and realized they were intelligent enough to form complex relationships. So we invested 8 years in building trust. On the monitors, the battle was turning decisively. The pirates on the northern zone had already surrendered, overwhelmed by sheer numbers and coordination. The eastern zone was collapsing rapidly as raiders threw down their weapons rather than face the coordinated Ravager assault. Only the southern zone still fought, but even Commander Vrek's elite troops were faltering. Cease fire, all teams, Jake Hamilton ordered. Let them surrender. The Ravagers pulled back immediately, responding to their handlers' signals. They formed a loose perimeter around the remaining pirates but didn't attack. The message was clear: surrender now or face the consequences. Commander Vrek dropped his weapon. His remaining troops followed suit. In less than 30 minutes, the entire raid had been shattered without a single human casualty. Handlers, begin withdrawal pattern, Kate Morrison announced. Thank them and release them back to territory. On the screens, Quellen watched as human security personnel approached the Ravagers. Each handler spent time with their group, speaking softly, providing treats from their backpacks, checking the predators for injuries. It wasn't the behavior of military commanders with disposable weapons. It was the behavior of partners showing genuine care and appreciation. The Ravagers began melting back into the forest in small groups. A few stayed near the perimeter, maintaining watch over the subdued pirates. But most disappeared into the trees. Within minutes, the forest seemed empty again, as if the army of predators had never existed. Pierce turned to face Quellen directly. You want to call this weaponization? I understand why. But ask yourself this. Did we force the Ravagers to respond? Did we threaten them or manipulate them? Or did they choose to help Because we've spent 8 years proving we're allies worth protecting. Quellen had no answer. What he had witnessed defied every protocol, every standard approach to frontier defense. The humans had done something no other species had managed. They had turned a planet's greatest threat into its greatest protector. How many other human colonies use this approach? Torvak asked quietly. None yet, Lucas admitted. New Haven is the first. The prototype. We had to prove the concept worked before the Council would even consider approving it. And now you've proven it, Quellen said. By repelling a pirate raid that should have destroyed your colony. We proved something else too, Helen added softly. We proved that showing mercy isn't weakness. That building relationships is stronger than building walls. That the line between compassion and strategy doesn't have to exist if your intentions are genuine. Outside, human security personnel were processing the captured pirates. Medical teams were already treating wounded raiders. Medical teams, 10 at IB, showing the same care they gave to injured ravagers. Commander Vrek watched in obvious confusion as a human doctor set his broken arm with professional skill and genuine gentleness. The morning after the battle dawned quiet and surreal. Quellen stood in the medical facility, watching human doctors treat wounded pirates with the same careful attention they gave to injured ravagers. Commander Vrek sat on an examination table while Dr. Helen Carter checked his bandaged arm and monitored his vital signs. Why are you helping us? Vrek asked, his voice rough with confusion and pain. We came here to rob you. Kill you if necessary. Standard protocol would be to give us minimal care and ship us off to the nearest council prison. Helen looked up from her scanner, her expression gentle but firm. That might be standard protocol for some species. It's not ours. You're injured. We have the ability to help. That's all the reason we need. Vrek shook his head slowly. You're either saints or fools. I haven't decided which. Maybe we're neither, Helen replied. Maybe we just see things differently. Quellen moved away from the medical bay and found Torvak in the command center. His fellow diplomat was reviewing recorded footage from the battle, studying the Ravager coordination patterns with scientific fascination. I've analyzed 17 separate engagement sequences, Torvak said without looking up. The tactical sophistication is remarkable, not just in the Ravagers' responses, but in how the humans coordinated their movements. This wasn't improvised. They've practiced these patterns extensively, which means the medical program was always about this, Quellen said. Every rescued Ravager, every rehabilitation, every release with a tracking collar. They were building their defense network from the beginning, yet the care was genuine, Torvak countered. I've reviewed the medical records. The surgeries, the long-term treatments, the investment of resources. You can't fake that level of commitment. The humans truly care about these creatures. Quellen sat down heavily. That's what makes this so difficult to categorize. They built a weapon system based on genuine compassion. They created a military asset through authentic mercy. How does the Council classify something like that? Before Torvak could answer, a new presence entered the system. Long-range sensors detected an incoming diplomatic vessel with Council authorization codes. Within hours, a ship bearing the Council seal landed at the colony. Representative Mara Voss emerged, a senior Council official known for her thorough investigations and uncompromising standards. She was a Threxian, tall and thin with crystalline skin that refracted light in subtle colors. Her reputation preceded her. When Mara Voss investigated something, she left no question unasked, no assumption unchallenged. Ambassador Quellen, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the translator work overtime. I received your preliminary report. The Council demands a complete investigation before making any decisions about human membership. Colonel Pierce met them in the main conference room. Lucas Perry and Jake Hamilton joined him, along with Dr. Carter and Kate Morrison. The room felt crowded with tension and unspoken questions. Mara Voss wasted no time. I've reviewed the battle recordings. I've examined the medical facility records. I've studied the tracking data for 207 apex predators. Now I want answers, and I want them truthful. Did you deliberately weaponize this planet's predator population? No, Pierce said simply. Then explain what I've seen. Explain how you managed to create a coordinated defense force from creatures that have killed colonists from a dozen other species. Pierce leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. We didn't create anything. We discovered a possibility and explored it. When we first arrived, we studied the Ravagers intensively. We learned they were far more intelligent than previous assessments indicated. They have complex social structures, sophisticated communication, and most importantly, they're capable of forming relationships across species boundaries. Many species are capable of that, Mara Voss said. Domestication is a well-known process. This isn't domestication, Helen Carter interjected. Domestication implies changing a species through selective breeding and genetic modification over generations. We haven't changed the Ravagers. They're still wild, still predators, still completely autonomous. We simply proved we could be trusted. By providing medical care, Torvak said. By showing consistent, genuine care over 8 years, Lucas corrected. The first Ravager we helped was a female with severe infection from a broken fang. She should have died. Instead, we spent 6 weeks treating her, keeping her comfortable, healing her. When we released her, she remembered. Kate Morrison pulled up a video file on the conference room display. It showed a young Ravager limping into the colony's outer zone, clearly injured. A human approached slowly, offering food. The Ravager hesitated, then accepted. The human moved closer, examining the injury, speaking softly. The Ravager didn't attack. That was 3 months into our colonization, Kate explained. Word spread through the Ravager population. Not consciously, but through behavior and scent marking. The predators learned that humans helped rather than harmed. Over time, some began approaching us when injured. You're describing a symbiotic relationship, Mara Voss said slowly. Exactly, Pierce confirmed. We provide medical care, food during harsh seasons, and protection from other environmental threats. The Ravagers provide territorial security and warning of dangerous weather patterns. It's mutually beneficial. And when raiders attack, Mara Voss pressed, is that protection part of the natural relationship? The Ravagers see this territory as their own, Jake Hamilton said. They've accepted us as part of their extended pack structure. When threats enter their territory, they respond. We don't command that response. We coordinate it to minimize casualties on all sides. Mara Voss stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest edge where shapes moved in the shadows. Ravagers, pacing the perimeter, maintaining their watch. You realize what you're claiming? That you've achieved peaceful integration with apex predators. That you've built a defense system based entirely on mutual respect and cooperation. Do you understand how this appears to the Council? Revolutionary or dangerous? Pierce said quietly. Probably both. If we approve this, Mara Voss continued, other human colonies will attempt similar integration with local predator species. Some will succeed. Some will fail catastrophically. The Council will be responsible for those failures. Then let us prove it's replicable, Lucas suggested. Send observers to study our methods. Document the process. Establish protocols. We're not claiming this works everywhere with every species, but where it can work, the benefits are extraordinary. Mara Voss turned back to face them. I need to see something. I need to see these Ravagers without your coordination. Without the tracking collars. Without the signals and whistles. I need to know if they're truly choosing this relationship, or if they're simply responding to sophisticated conditioning. Pierce exchanged glances with his team. That's a significant risk. The collars provide safety measures, communication channels, emergency protocols. If the relationship is genuine, you won't need them, Mara Voss said flatly. If it's not, then the Council has its answer. There was a long silence. Finally, Pierce nodded. We'll do it. But we need time to prepare. The Ravagers need to understand what's happening. We can't just cut off communications suddenly without causing confusion and potential fear responses. You have 24 hours, Mara Voss said. Tomorrow, we remove all technological interfaces. Then we'll see the truth of this partnership. As the meeting dispersed, Quellen found Lucas standing alone on an observation deck, looking out at the forest. The human's expression was troubled. You're worried, Quellen observed. We've never done this before, Lucas admitted. The collars have always been our safety net, our way to communicate clearly. Without them, we're relying entirely on 8 years of trust and relationship building. Do you believe the Ravagers will stay? Lucas was quiet for a long moment. I believe they'll choose what's best for them. If that means staying, they'll stay. If it means leaving, we'll respect that choice. That's what partnership means. Both sides get to choose. And if they leave, you lose your defense system. Then we find another way, Lucas said simply. We never wanted to trap them into protecting us. We wanted to build something real. If it's not real, then it shouldn't exist. Quellen looked out at the forest, at the shapes moving through the trees, at the massive predators that had somehow become guardians. Tomorrow would reveal the truth. Either the humans had built something genuinely revolutionary, or they had constructed an elaborate illusion that would collapse the moment the technology was removed. For what it's worth, Quellen said quietly, I hope you succeed. What you've built here challenges everything the Council believes about frontier defense and species relationships. That kind of challenge is either exactly what we need or exactly what we should fear. Lucas smiled slightly. Welcome to dealing with humans. We specialize in making people unsure whether to thank us or fear us. As night fell, Kate Morrison and her team began the careful process of removing the tracking. Coladon broke over New Haven with unusual silence. Quellen stood at his window and noticed immediately what was different. No Ravagers paced the perimeter. No shapes moved through the forest shadows. The predators that had maintained their watch for years were simply gone. He dressed quickly and made his way to the command center. He found Lucas Perry already there, staring at blank monitors that normally showed tracking data. Without the collars, the screens displayed nothing but empty maps. They left during the night, Lucas said quietly. All of them. We have no idea where they went. Kate Morrison sat at her station, her face pale. We removed the last collars at sunset yesterday. By midnight, the perimeter was empty. They just disappeared into the deep forest. Mara Voss entered the command center with Torvak and Pierce. The council representative looked at the empty monitors and nodded slowly. So the relationship depended on the technology after all. Without the collars and communication systems, the Ravagers chose to distance themselves. We don't know that yet, Pierce said. But his voice lacked conviction. They might simply be adjusting to the change. They could return. I was en early. I was en early. I was no work. I was en early. 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 I was en or they've realized they're free and have chosen to remain free. Mara Voss countered. Which would indicate that the cooperation was less voluntary than you claimed. Helen Carter joined them, carrying a data pad. I've been reviewing the behavioral patterns from the past 8 years. The Ravagers have never disappeared like this before. Even individuals released far from the colony maintained some territorial overlap with the settlement. This is unprecedented. Because you've never removed their leashes before, Mara Voss said bluntly. The collars were control devices, regardless of how you framed them. Without that control, the Ravagers have chosen separation. Quellen watched Lucas's expression. The human looked pained but not defensive. He simply nodded slowly. If that's their choice, we respect it. We never wanted to trap them into a relationship they didn't truly want. Noble sentiment, Mara Voss said. But it leaves you defenseless. Another raiding party could arrive tomorrow and find an unprotected colony. Then we'll defend ourselves another way, Jake Hamilton said. We've always known this was a possibility. We have contingency plans. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Human colonists went about their daily work, but Quellen noticed the tension in their movements. The worried glances toward the forest. Children played in the parks under closer supervision. Security personnel checked weapons that hadn't been needed in years. By mid-afternoon, Mara Voss had begun drafting her report. Quellen read over her shoulder as she wrote, "Human colony New Haven demonstrated sophisticated but ultimately unsustainable integration with local predator species. Removal of technological control systems resulted in immediate abandonment of cooperative relationship. Recommend against approval of similar programs on other frontier worlds." "You're writing the conclusion before the experiment is complete," Quellen said. "The conclusion is obvious," Mara Voss replied. "The Ravagers are gone. They've been gone for 18 hours. If the relationship was genuine, they would have maintained contact, even without the collars." Young Danny Clark appeared in the command center doorway, looking small and worried. "Dr. Carter? Can I talk to you?" Helen knelt down to his level. "Of course, Danny. What's wrong?" "The Ravagers are gone. Did we do something bad? Did we make them mad?" Helen pulled the boy into a gentle hug. "No, sweetie. We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes relationships change. And that's okay. We wanted them to be free to choose." "But I miss Big Red," Danny said, his voice muffled against Helen's shoulder. "I wanted to say goodbye." The simple sadness in the child's voice affected Quellen more than any tactical analysis could. This wasn't about military strategy or political advantage. These humans had genuinely cared about the predators. They were grieving what they perceived as a loss. As sunset approached, Mara Voss prepared to transmit her final report to the council. Lucas Perry requested one last meeting. "Before you file that report," he said, "I want to show you something." He led them to the rehabilitation facility where Big Red had recovered from his broken leg months ago. The enclosure stood empty now, the door open. Lucas pulled up old video files, showing the weeks of careful treatment, the patient healing process, the trust that developed between predator and humans. "This is what we built," Lucas said. "Not a weapon system. Not a defense network. We built relationships. Real, genuine connections with creatures that everyone else feared and abandoned. Maybe we failed. Maybe the Ravagers decided they were better off without us. But we tried something that mattered." "Trying isn't success," Mara Voss said. "The council evaluates results, not intentions." "Then evaluate this result," Pierce interjected. 8 years of peaceful coexistence. 0 human casualties from predator attacks. A colony thriving on a world others declared uninhabitable. We didn't achieve that through walls and weapons. We achieved it through understanding and compassion, which apparently ended the moment you removed your technological control, Mara Voss said. "We don't know that yet," Lucas insisted. "It's been 19 hours, Mara Voss replied. "How long do you need to wait before accepting reality?" A sound interrupted their debate. Soft at first, then growing louder. A familiar rhythmic howling from the forest edge. Then another voice joined it. And another. Everyone rushed to the windows. The setting sun cast long shadows across the settlement, and in those shadows, shapes began to emerge. Ravagers, dozens of them. Returning from the deep forest in loose groups and pairs, Kate Morrison ran to the observation deck, her eyes wide. "They're coming back. All of them." The Ravagers didn't approach aggressively or cautiously. They moved with the confident ease of creatures returning home. They spread out along the perimeter in their familiar positions, settling into the territory they had claimed years ago. Big Red appeared from the tree line, moving with the distinctive gait created by his once broken leg. He walked directly to the rehabilitation facility where Danny Clark stood at the fence. The massive predator and small boy regarded each other for a long moment. Then Big Red made that low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl. Danny laughed and reached through the fence to touch the Ravager's armored head. Ryan Foster checked his equipment, confused. "They don't have collars. There's no signal for them to respond to. But they're taking up their positions just like before. They're choosing it," Helen Carter said, her voice filled with wonder. "They left to prove they could. Now they're returning to prove they want to." Mara Voss watched the scene unfold with an expression Quellen couldn't quite read. More ravagers continued to emerge from the forest, not just the ones from nearby territories, but individuals that had ranged far into the wilderness. They were all coming back. Where did they go? Torvak asked. Deep forest, Kate Morrison said, studying the ravagers through binoculars. Look at their paws. Fresh mud from the river valleys, plant matter from the high ridges. They ranged across their entire traditional territory. They went back to being completely wild, completely free, and then they chose to return, Lucas said quietly. A thought occurred to Quellen. The collars. You removed them all before sunset yesterday? Yes, Kate confirmed. The last one came off around 7 in the evening, and the ravagers were gone by midnight, Quellen continued. That's only 5 hours. Not enough time to range across an entire territory. They didn't scatter randomly. They gathered deliberately. Understanding dawned on several faces at once. Torvak voiced it first. They assembled. All of them. They went to a meeting place. Ravagers have territorial gathering sites, Helen said, excitement building in her voice. We've documented them but never witnessed a full assembly. They use them for major social decisions that affect the entire population group. They held a vote, Lucas breathed. They removed themselves from our influence entirely, gathered together without any human presence or technological connection. And they decided as a community whether to maintain the relationship. And they chose to return, Pierce finished. Mara Voss walked to the window, her crystalline skin catching the sunset light in brilliant refractions. She watched as more ravagers settled into position, as young Danny played with Big Red, as Kate Morrison walked the perimeter greeting returning individuals with obvious joy. This changes the evaluation significantly, she said finally. This isn't trained behavior or technological conditioning. This is genuine autonomous choice by an intelligent species to maintain cooperative relations with humans. It's partnership, Lucas said simply. Real partnership means both sides get to choose, even when it's inconvenient or risky for the other. We gave them that choice. They made it freely. Mara Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then she deleted the report she had been drafting and began writing a new one. Quellen watched the words appear on her screen. Human colony demonstrates unprecedented successful integration with apex predator species based on mutual respect, genuine care, and autonomous cooperation. Recommends approval for scaled study of integration methods across suitable frontier environments. The next morning, Mara Voss held a final meeting with the colony leadership. The council will need to study your methods extensively. This will mean more observers, more documentation, more scrutiny. Are you prepared for that? We are, Pierce confirmed. We have nothing to hide. Everything we've done, we'll share. If this approach can help other colonies coexist with their environments instead of fighting them, then it's worth the scrutiny. One question troubles me, Mara Voss said. What happens when you encounter species that can't be reasoned with? Predators without the intelligence or social structure for cooperation? Your approach won't work everywhere. Quote, no approach works everywhere, Lucas replied. But we'll try understanding first, cooperation second, and force only as a last resort. That's the human way. The human way, Mara Voss repeated thoughtfully. 8 years ago, the Council thought this planet would be your graveyard. Instead, you've turned it into a model for a new kind of frontier colonization. We just saw potential where others saw obstacles, Helen said. Every weapon in the galaxy was once just a tool waiting for someone to understand its purpose. We looked at these predators and saw partners, not weapons. That made all the difference. Quellen stood with Torvak at the landing pad as their diplomatic ship prepared for departure. In the distance, Danny Clark rode on Big Red's back, while other children watched in amazement. The boy and the predator moved together with perfect trust, perfect comfort. We came here expecting to evaluate military capability, Torvak said. Instead, we witnessed something far more significant. A new way of thinking. Quellen agreed. Humans don't just adapt to their environments. They build relationships with them. They find cooperation where others see only conflict. The Council will debate this for years, Torvak predicted. Let them debate, Quellen said, watching as more Ravagers emerged from the forest for evening patrol. These humans have already proven their point. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a gun or a shield. Sometimes, it's simply the courage to show mercy when everyone else shows fear. As their ship lifted off, Quellen took one last look at New Haven. The settlement glowed in the twilight, surrounded by protective shadows that moved with purpose and care, humans and Ravagers, living together in a harmony that shouldn't have been possible but somehow was. It was revolutionary. It was inspiring, and it would change how every species in the galaxy thought about frontier colonization, predator management, and the very definition of partnership between intelligent beings. The humans had shown mercy to wounded predators, and in doing so, they had built something stronger than any conventional defense system. They had built trust, and trust, freely given and freely returned, was the most powerful force in the universe. RS from accessible Ravagers, each removal was accompanied by long conversations in the whistle language the humans and Ravagers shared. Explanations given with patience and care, even though no one could be certain how much was truly understood. The Ravagers accepted the collar removals with calm trust, but Quellen noticed something in their body language. Confusion, perhaps, or concern about the change in routine. Tomorrow would reveal whether trust alone could sustain what technology had helped build. Tomorrow would prove whether humanity's approach to coexistence was genius or folly. Tomorrow would show whether mercy could truly function as strength without any tools to enforce it. Quellen realized that this was the part that would trouble the Council most. The humans hadn't just won. They had won while maintaining their principles, while treating their enemies with compassion, while proving that mercy and strength could coexist. It was revolutionary and deeply threatening to species who built their power on domination and fear. The Council will need to review this thoroughly, he said finally. We understand, Pierce replied. We're prepared to answer any questions. As Quellen left the bunker and stepped into the aftermath of the battle, he found young Danny Clark sitting on a low wall, watching the captured pirates being led away. Next to him sat one of the Ravagers, a massive creature with old scars from some long-ago injury. The boy and the predator watched together in companionable silence. It was an image that would stay with Quellen for the rest of his life. A child and a monster, sitting peacefully side by side. Proof that what seemed impossible was simply waiting for someone brave enough to try. For 8 years, they had been systematically integrating themselves into the planet's apex predator population. The question that haunted Quellen as they returned to their quarters was simple. Why? What did humans gain from this elaborate system? What purpose did it serve beyond the stated goal of coexistence? He didn't have to wait long for the answer. That evening, the colony's long-range sensors detected an incoming ship. It wasn't transmitting proper identification codes. It wasn't responding to hails. And it was on a direct approach vector to the colony. Jake Hamilton's calm voice came over the settlement's communication system, but Quellen caught the edge of steel beneath it. All personnel, this is Security Chief Hamilton. Unidentified vessel approaching, moving to Protocol Shepard. This is not a drill. Protocol Shepard. Quellen had never heard that term before. But as alarms began to sound softly throughout the settlement and humans moved to predetermined positions with practiced efficiency, he realized he was about to understand exactly what the humans had been preparing for all along. Quellen nodded slowly, but his mind was already working through what he had seen. The humans weren't irrational. Everything they did was purposeful and careful. They were achieving something remarkable, even if it defied all conventional wisdom. The question that troubled him as he settled in for the night was simple but profound. Why were the humans investing so many resources in helping creatures that provided no obvious benefit? What did they gain from this relationship beyond the satisfaction of being merciful? He had a feeling the answer was important, he just didn't know why yet.